Springfield. Superintendent Galvan here reading another story with you, and so thank you for joining us today. Today's story is Lillian's Right to Vote. So this is when folks years ago, and this was in 1965, got the right to vote. And so we're going to hear about Lillian's story today, and this is written by Jonah Winter and Shane Evans. Hola comunidad de Greenfield, soy Superintendente Galván, leyendo otra historia con ustedes y otra vez vamos a leer unas historias del pasado de diversidad y esta historia se llama Lillian's Derecho de Votar y este es sobre el acto de votar en 1965 del pasado. So vamos a leerlo y a ver lo que podemos aprender juntos hoy. So let's read this and see what we can learn today. All right, so first story page here. A very old woman stands at the bottom of a very steep hill. It's voting day. She's an American, and by God, she is going to vote. Lillian is her name. It's a long haul up that steep hill. It's a long haul when you've been alive for 100 years. It's a long haul when you've lived the life that Lillian has and walked so far in her shoes. When Lillian looks up, it's more than blue skies she sees. She sees history. Lillian sees her great-great-grandparents, Elijah and Sarah. They are standing side by side on an auction block. Sarah is holding their baby Edmund. They are being sold as slaves in front of the very same Alabama courthouse where rich white men and no one else are allowed to vote. Lillian starts her slow climb. Though the sun shines brightly, Lillian sees a dark time from years long past. She sees her great-grandfather, Edmund, now grown. He is owned by another man, forced to pick cotton from daybreak to nightfall, right here in this country where it is written that all men are created equal. He sure doesn't have the right to vote. In fact, he doesn't have the right to do much at all until after the Civil War, which will end slavery. As Lillian inches up the hill, past one neighbor's house and then the next, she sees her great-grandpa Edmund on his way to vote for the very first time, thanks to a law that was passed in 1870. 1870. The law is the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says that American citizens' right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. Even though the law does not allow women to vote, great-grandma Ida is with her husband Lillian. Lillian feels their dignity and their pride as they enter the courthouse for the very first time. But as Lillian continues and the hill gets steeper, but that hill is steep, she sees what happens just 20 years later, right here in Alabama. There's her grandpa, Isaac, at the courthouse, being charged a poll tax to vote, a tax he doesn't have the money to pay. So much for the 15th Amendment, so much for Grandpa Isaac's right to vote. Lillian pauses to catch her breath, hearing now the voice of her Uncle Levi. He is telling about those tests that he was forced to take when he tried to vote, and about the sneer on the registrar's face when he asked, "How many bubbles are in a bar of soap?" Her uncle's lips so tight as he recalls being asked to name all 67 judges in the state of Alabama, and being turned away when he failed to answer that question. As Lillian pushes on, struggling to keep her balance, she sees a brave girl standing next to her mother and her father as they try to register to vote. The year is 1920, and the 19th Amendment has just been passed, a law that allowed women to vote. The girl is Lillian herself, with her mama and her papa. They are being chased away by an angry mob. There's Mr. Bentley, the barber, and Mr. McCroy, who owns the ice cream shop. She feels the firm grip of her mother's hand as they run through the streets back home. And though today the birds are singing, and people are smiling, Lillian sees in vivid orange and brilliant red the cross burning on the lawn of her girlhood home, set aflame by the same angry mob, just because her parents wanted to vote. This is something she will always see. Lillian stops in her tracks, unable to keep going. As she stands there, she sees herself trying to register to vote for the very first time. She sees the blank piece of paper on which she must write down a section of the U.S. Constitution, word for word, and it's being mumbled by the registrar. A test she could not pass. No one could pass it. "Are you going to vote?" she asks a young man who passes by her route. "Yes, ma'am," he answers. "You better," she says, and she meant it. For Lillian, seeing the funeral procession for a man named Jimmy Lee Jackson, a 26-year-old shot by a policeman over nothing more than taking part in a peaceful protest. It is March of 1965. All he'd wanted to do was have justice and the right to vote. Looking up the top of the hill, Lillian wonders how she'll ever make it. It looks so far, and she's so tired. Though her feet and her legs ache with 100 years of walking, what fuels her ancient body is seeing those 600 people beginning a peaceful protest. March from Selma to Montgomery. People who, though they don't know it yet, will be stopped on a bridge in Selma by police officers with clubs. All they want is justice and the right to vote. At the front is future Congressman John Lewis, whose forehead will always bear the scar from where he was beaten. As long as Lillian still has a pulse, she is going to vote. And so she keeps on climbing, keeps on seeing, this time the second march from Selma. This march also ends on a bridge in a prayer led by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., whose dreams of justice for African American people are already famous. Wherever he went, he lifted people up with his words, and his words still lift up Lillian, who, seeing the top of the hill, is not about to stop. Footstep by footstep, she keeps on going. Just as the marchers from Selma to Montgomery keep on going through the cold and rain, finally making it all the way to Montgomery on their third march. She sees them all: Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, rabbis, priests, and 25,000 other people. Lillian is there. She can still hear Reverend King asking how long they would have to wait for justice. She can still feel the power of his voice when he says, "Not long." And as she takes those final steps to the top of the hill, Lillian can still see Reverend King right there. For she can hear the voice of President Lyndon Johnson on her TV saying to America, "Every American citizen must have an equal right to vote. There is no duty which weighs more heavily on us than the duty we have to ensure that right. All of us must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome." Before Lillian walks through the door of the building, where you better believe she will vote, she looks up and sees the same blue sky, brighter than any sky she's ever seen. Then she saw on August 6th of 1965. That was the day President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, the one law protecting all Americans' right to vote. In every state and every town, the one law protecting Lillian as a full-fledged citizen of the United States of America. She enters the building, and as Lillian steps into the voting booth, once again, she sees herself stepping into the voting booth in 1965 for the first time. And as she knows full well, she would not be standing here today were it not for the people who marched and the people who died for her right to vote. Lillian touches her finger to the lever, and because she's a citizen of the United States of America, protected by the voting right, Act of 1965, Lillian pushes that lever and Lillian votes. And that is today's story. So she may be an older lady, but Lillian never took for granted the right to vote. And boys and girls, you need to talk to your parents about the right to vote because it's a very important right that we have as American citizens to be able to go and exercise and decide who we want for our president, for our governors, for our senators, assemblymen, for anyone in our communities that are considered politicians. So thank you for listening to today's story, Lillian's Right to Vote. This journey was a very long one for her, which had lots of very important history within it. So thank you for joining me today. I'm Superintendent Galvan with the Greenfield Union School District. Thanking you for your time. Sending you a great big bear hug from our family to yours.